As I said in one of the earlier clips, we're just going to assume that the preferences exist and that people have these preferences, and we're not going to look at where these things come from. We're going to take those as given, as primitives. In other words, we're going to take those as being innate to the individuals we're studying. Of course, you could challenge this assumption, and that's an assumption that people have challenged, and it is a current area of research, the study of where these things come from. But we're going to, for the purposes of this course, we're going to take them as given, and we're going to make some assumptions about what these preferences look like. We're going to assume that these preferences are complete, transitive, and monotonic. I'll get into each of those in turn. So what do we mean by completeness of a preference? So take any pair of bundles, A and B. What completeness says is that the preference can tell me at least one of the three following things. Either it will tell me that A is better than B, that B is better than A, or that the consumer is indifferent between A and B. But it's never going to say, oh, I don't know, I can't compare these. Completeness therefore says any pair of bundles can be compared one way or another. So just written in English instead of notation, A is either strictly preferred to B is strictly preferred to A, or they're indifferent. What it says you can't do is say, I don't know. Now, is this a good assumption? Obviously, nobody can have written down or pre-formulated in their head comparisons between infinitely many different bundles. However, if we can ask you enough questions about, hey, here's a bundle A and a bundle B, how do you compare these? And you give me an answer. And then I give you another pair. Maybe I give you B and C. And I say, which of these two do you like better? And you tell me the answer. And then I give you a fourth bundle. Let's say a bundle D. And I say, okay, how do you compare B and D? And so forth. I just ask you a series of questions. What we have are reasonably good statistical techniques for being able to ask you some finite number of questions, and from the answers to those, to be able to complete what your preferences would be. Now, without the assumption of completeness, it would be very hard to make any predictions as to what a consumer would do. If there are situations where the consumer just doesn't know what bundle they would prefer, then how would we be able to say, well, when the consumer's confronted with the choice between A and B, the consumer is going to pick this? Well, we can't make any predictions, or there's just very little we could say about a situation where a consumer would be confronted with those types of choices. So we're going to assume that the consumer has these types of complete preferences. What does it mean for preferences to be transitive? Well, if A is at least as good as B, and B is at least as good as C, then A better be at least as good as C. So this is just like transitivity of the greater than or equal to relation that you've seen, I'm sure, in your math classes. So if you have three real numbers, x, y, and z, and x is at least as big as y is at least as big as z, then we know that x has to be at least as big as z. Now, the question is, does it make sense for a person's preferences not to be transitive? So what would it mean for a preference not to be transitive? It would mean that you tell me that A is at least as good as B, you tell me that B is at least as good as C, but then you say that C is better than A. Now, when economists talk about rationality, what they mean is that preferences are transitive. So transitivity is mainly what economists mean by rationality. Now, strict preferences and indifferences would also have to be transitive. If A is better than B, B is better than C, then you'd expect A to be better than C. Similarly, if I'm indifferent between A and B, I'm indifferent between A and C, B and C, then I better be indifferent between A and C. Now, just to go back to the original question here, does it make sense for a preference not to be transitive? So let's suppose you told me A is better than B is better than C, So given a choice between bundle A and bundle B, I give you a choice in this set, and you say, I'm going to pick A. I give you a choice between B and C, you're going to pick B. And I give you a choice between A and C. If C is better than A, then you're going to pick C. So then what does it mean if I give you a choice between A, B, and C altogether? Which one are you going to pick? Because you've told me that A beats B, B beats C, C beats A. So which of these three do you pick? So if you have non-transitive preferences, it's impossible for you to make choices from larger sets. So that's why we're going to assume that preferences are transitive. Okay, the last preference assumption we're going to make is monotonicity. So this says more is better. So if A contains more pizza and more beer than B, remember these are bundles, A and B are bundles of pizza and beer. So if A has more pizza and more beer than B, then you like A better than B. More is better. So suppose A is a bundle 2-1, so 2 pizzas and 1 beer, and B is a bundle 3-2, 3 pizzas and 2 beers, then you have to have B is better than A. Now this is not the most important assumption. A lot of things, this could be weakened substantially and still we get a lot of the results that we'd be able to get with this assumption, but it's very convenient for us to make this assumption, so we're going to stick to this assumption throughout this course. And it's a fairly reasonable assumption to make. After all, who doesn't like pizza and beer? And that's especially true if you could just throw away anything that's excess. In economics jargon, we call this free disposal. So if you have free disposal of the goods, then there's no reason you wouldn't have monotonic preferences. Now, when we say monotonic preferences, and we make this assumption that more is better, what we're really saying are that these are quote-unquote goods, that you like having these things. But are all goods really goods? What about quote-unquote bads? What about things that you don't like? What about air pollution, or dirty dishes left in your sink, or the time spent studying for this course? You don't want to spend time on these things. Now, our model could work just as well for these types of things. You just need to rephrase what it is that you're looking at. So in the case of air pollution, sure, air pollution is a bad thing, but clean air is good. So instead of looking at air pollution, we just look at clean air, which is the opposite of it. And instead of dirty dishes, we look at clean dishes. Instead of time spent studying for this course, we think of time spent not studying for this course, or time spent doing fun things. In other words, we're just switching the sign on the good. We can also accommodate things like time, work, leisure, non-physical goods as well. But just to keep things relatively simple, we're going to assume that everything's a good and that more is always better.